During a time in my life where I was lapsed out of video games besides Rock Band and Skate 2, I discovered a teaser for Batman Arkham Asylum, and it had been the first game in a while to really grab my attention. I loved Batman, and seeing a game for him that wasn't just a tie-in for a movie or show really piqued my interest. I was able to pick it up a month after it came out, and it was really the perfect game to play during the week of Halloween. The unsettling atmosphere and not knowing what would be around the corner really captured this sense of unease and fear playing as Batman. I've said this many times, but I fell in love with Arkham Asylum on that first playthrough back in high school, and it's not just because it was a Batman game. I was noticing ways in which the game was designed to specifically keep me on the edge of my seat the entire way through. It was the first superhero game that I had played that didn't feel like a quick cash-in. Rocksteady had perfectly implemented the ethos of Batman into almost every aspect of the game, and every time I go back to it, I feel like I discover or rediscover another layer in which they did just that. It was the title that got me back into video games. Welcome to the first episode of the Arkham Files, a KindaFunny games mini-series where I, Barrett Courtney, look back at what made each game in the Batman Arkham franchise so special. Today, let's talk about designing fear in the game where it all started. Of course, before we dive deep, let's look back at what made Batman Arkham Asylum a standout hit. We saw the return of the definitive voices of Batman and Joker with Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, which really made this feel like a spiritual successor to the Batman animated series universe. And honestly, I think this game really let both actors go all out in their performances. While the animated series was upheld for how dark and gritty it was for a kid's show, Arkham Asylum seemed to want to push that even further. The combat, while feeling sluggish now compared to its follow-ups, flowed so well and truly simulated the ease of Batman fighting crime. That, mixed with the Predator mode to help stoke fear into your enemies, really nailed the fear that Batman brings out in his prey. The game was also heightened by its inspiration from Metroidvania design. Circling back to areas you couldn't get to before by unlocking certain gadgets helped keep the feeling like everything you came across was important. And it was honestly this that made high school Barrett open up his eyes to how great game design could be. Especially with trying to 100% the game by getting everything left behind by the Riddler, I'd been opened up to what good collectibles could be, and not just the filler collectathons that I grew up loving. Speaking of the Riddler, his presence opened up a way for the devs to really flesh out this world, while not having to sacrifice the very focused and small-scale story. I loved solving riddles that would open up a character bio to Ratcatcher or Killer Moth of all villains, which also leads to the menu and UI design in Asylum, which I believe are the best in the entire series. It keeps that dark and stylized comic book feel and contrasts well with the gothic and realistic looking world design. All of these things, mixed with the score that also doesn't hesitate to harken back to the animated series, and the fucked up interpretation of Batman's rogues gallery. Whether it's fighting off Zsasz from making another mark, seeing Killer Croc possibly eat Scarecrow, Scarecrow making Batman re-experience some terrible things in his life, Rocksteady was not afraid of throwing us into the deep end of how messed up Batman's world can be. All of these elements made a fantastic game, but there's something below the surface that I believe still makes Arkham Asylum a thrill to play today. I've played this game dozens of times at this point, so I've definitely become desensitized to what the devs wanted us to experience while playing. So I've really had to think back to the first time I played this game and how unsettling it was the entire time. Of course, I am a big baby when playing scary games.
Oh, I don't like that shit. Ah!
And while Arkham Asylum is definitely on the lighter side of being quote-unquote scary, there's still something masterfully done from a design standpoint to really make you feel like you're Batman on one of his worst nights. Of course, it's Batman. He's as prepared as he can be, but being stuck on Arkham Island throughout the entire game with limited resources while the Joker runs amok really makes you feel like you're at a disadvantage, which honestly, Batman experiences all the time. While for the most part you have the bells and whistles of Batman, you always feel one step behind your foes, which purposefully limits the feeling of Batman at his full potential. Rocksteady has said before that they wanted cutscenes in Arkham Asylum to be used to constantly change the goals of the player or modify the importance of the steps they take to bring down the Joker. To me, that mindset helps the feeling of accomplishment being always just out of reach. I remember on my first playthrough that while I had little accomplishments like neutralizing Bane or capturing Harley, I knew this was all by Joker's design. And it's that simple fact right there that kept that sense of unease until the final cutscene. This entire night is all a part of Joker's game. His henchmen have been busted out, and even though it's an island with a few different buildings, it's still a small island, and Joker's crew constantly have their guard up. They're expecting you. One of the producers of Arkham Asylum, Nathan Burlow, cited BioShock as another influence for the game, with BioShock's unique narrative and atmosphere. If we dig a little deeper into this influence, BioShock is another game where you never feel fully in control of what's happening in the City of Rapture. And I believe this bled into some of the design philosophy for Arkham Asylum. While you definitely have more skill as Batman than Jack from BioShock, taking down enemies in brawls or as an apex predator constantly evolve with new enemy types or familiar environments being changed to up the ante. You constantly have to adapt. You just never knew what the game was going to throw at you the first time you played it. You never felt fully in control, especially with some of the boss fights. While the final Joker fight was never great, the fixed camera angle while Joker lunges at you makes you feel so small in the face of certain death. The Poison Ivy fight, while also hokey, is similar where you slowly whittle away at the health bar of a 50-foot plant. And while not necessarily a traditional boss fight, one of my favorite boss encounters in the entire series, Killer Croc, really keeps you on the edge of your seat because you find yourself exploring a maze with Killer Croc always on your tail. This encounter perfectly encapsulates how I feel about this game as a whole. You never feel fully in control. And even after leaving Croc's lair, you don't feel like you can breathe a sigh of relief just yet. For years, Arkham fans have debated time and time again about which is better, Asylum or City. And while I typically find myself arguing for the sequel, something that often gets overlooked in the fight for Asylum is how the game is masterfully designed around feeling some sort of fear throughout your entire night on Arkham Island. Like I said earlier, you have all of the bells and whistles as Batman, but Batman was only so prepared for this night, and because of that, almost failed at defeating the Joker. And that feeling of almost failing, but coming out on top at the very last moment is the most Batman thing to feel. Join me on the next episode of the Arkham Files as we'll dive into how Rocksteady shifted the power dynamic in Batman Arkham City, which premieres next Monday on the 10-year anniversary of Batman Arkham City's release. And until next time,
get some rest. You deserve it.